Hey, welcome to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis. Today I'm doing a bit of a deep dive on the classic era of Depeche Mode. That means different things to different people. To me, the classic era of Depeche Mode is from the album Speak and Spell in 1981 all the way through Songs of Faith and Devotion in 1993. That's my classic era. So this is going to be a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot like life. Let's do this. So how did this get started? So a tall drink of water named Andy Fletcher met little Vince Clarke, and the two of them formed a bunch of guitar-based bands prior to Depeche Mode. At some point, Fletch introduced Martin Gore to Vince, and the three of them formed a band called Consequence of Sound. When Dave Gahan joined on vocals, he suggested the name Depeche Mode. This is the Depeche Mode lineup of the first album era. People often ask, what exactly does Fletch do in Depeche Mode? At least in this early incarnation of the band, Fletch brings people together, baby. In 1981, the band puts out Speak and Spell. This album is on Mute Records, as are all of Depeche Mode's early albums. This was produced by Mute Records owner Daniel Miller, aka The Normal. And a couple of Martin Gore songs aside, this is very much a Vince Clarke album. Right here, Vince lays down the musical blueprint that he would ride to chart success with two other super successful bands, Yazoo, or Yaz in the States, and Erasure. The album kicks off with New Life, which is charming as hell, and the music is so weird yet oddly compelling that it's almost like something they picked up off Devo's cutting room floor. Puppets is a very smooth, seductive track, with some of the warmest musical tones on this album, lying underneath some of the iciest lyrics on this whole LP. Which brings us to Dreaming of Me. Dreaming of Me, I first heard on a K-Tel record called The Beat back in the 80s. That K-Tel record was also my introduction to Bow Wow Wow. And for my Bow Wow Wow episode, just click above. In a new window, please. I love this track. I think it's Dave Gahan's best vocal performance on the album. He really sells the somewhat idiosyncratic lyrics. Incidentally, you want the US version of this album if you're looking for original pressings. You don't want the Euro version of the album, because that album has I Sometimes Wish I Was Dead instead of Dreaming of Me. Incidentally, if you get the single of Dreaming of Me, you're going to be really happy because this has the B-side Ice Machine, which is one of my favorite B-sides. I talk about it in my B-sides episode, which you can click above for cross-promotion. The song Boys Say Go, very Vince Clarke. Vince Clarke fans will understand when I say I keep expecting Boys Say Go to segue into Don't Go by Yazoo. It's a tad quicker, but a very similar rhythm. And it even uses some of the same keyboard notes as used on the first Yaz album. No Disco is another very Yazoo sounding track. The lyrics leave a bit to be desired. Move me, disco. Baby, don't you let go. But then again, it's solely meant to be danced to. You're not supposed to dissect it like it was Proust. What's Your Name is such a beautiful, fun pop song. If it went by the name Pretty Boy, every Depeche Mode fan would know it. As is the song's chorus, Hey You're Such a Pretty Boy, and the outro, P-R-E-T-T-Y, are probably only known by die-hard Depeche Mode fans. But it is a highlight. Side 2's Photographic sounds like something you'd hear on Sprockets. Now's the time on Sprockets When We Dance. Mike Myers? No? No one? Nothing? We're in the dark room in more ways than one with Photographic. It sounds very foreboding, and it's another of Vince Clarke's ode to equipment, much like Dreaming of Me's projector and screen. Tora 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 comes across as hectic and scary as the war movie it's named after. It's also the first Depeche Mode song on this album that's written by Martin Gore. It's followed by Big Muff, also written by Martin Gore, which is an instrumental. And it seems like during the Vince Clarke era, Martin Gore was put on the George Harrison 2-song per album allotment. Any Second Now, Voices, is the rarest of Depeche Mode songs. Written by Vince Clarke, but sung by Martin Gore. And he does a beautiful job. The original Any Second Now was an instrumental, hence the Voices tag. Which brings us to Just Can't Get Enough. What a great way to end an album. By the way, are you aware that if you search on YouTube for Just Can't Get Enough lyrics, you get some Black Eyed Peas song from 2011? Nothing against that song, but they were here first. Just Can't Get Enough is of course the greatest, or at least the most iconic, song of the Vince Clarke era. And I don't need to break down its greatness. Suffice it to say, I just can't seem to get enough Okay, Vince Clarke leaves the band about a month after the debut release. He'd already told them he was leaving while they were still finishing up the album. That probably wasn't awkward. Vince would soon found Yazoo with the gorgeous and talented Alison Moyet. If Martin Gore isn't in this band, it dies after Vince Clarke leaves and becomes nothing more than a footnote on the Wikipedia pages for Yazoo and Erasure. So Martin Gore becomes the principal songwriter. Out goes Vince Clarke and his pop tendencies, and in comes Martin Gore with his trunk load of minor chords. The band remains a trio for their sophomore album, A Broken Frame. When the song Leave in Silence kicks off this album, you're like, Vince who? It's such a strong song, it would leave you to believe that they'll be fine without Vince. But that feeling is short-lived. The inventiveness and infectiousness of Leave in Silence is not indicative of the rest of the LP. This album, in general, has a far darker sound than its predecessor. If it takes its lead from any track on the debut LP, it would probably be Puppets. My Secret Garden continues the dour outlook, and Martin Gore's style is now firmly established. Love, lust, secrets, religion, famine, pestilence. I don't know about the pestilence, but you see my point. Also, the object of love has changed genders, songwriting-wise. The debut album's musings on pretty boys and boys who say go have been replaced by a love for her and/or it. See You is one of the best songs on the album. It's a simple song about unrequited love that still manages to sound happy. It went up to number 6 on the charts. Also, its lyrical statement, "People are basically the same," pretty much sketches out the blueprint for future hit People Are People. Side 2's Satellite is as close as the band would ever come to klezmer. The Meaning of Love is a really fun song that comes out of nowhere and manages to evoke that fun, poppy feeling that Vince Clarke's songs used to. It wouldn't be out of place on the first album. The song A Photograph of You, it kind of does everything wrong, musically and lyrically, and I'm a little surprised it made the album. If anything, it underscores how starved the band was for material to record at this point with the departure of Vince. The final song, The Sun and the Rainfall, is the hidden gem on this album. It finishes the album on a very modernist note. The music sounds like something that could come out today. I would put it up against any Depeche Mode song from any era, but especially this early era. It really stands out. I'll put a link to the song below because I really want you to check it out. It's just beautiful. Incidentally, this is a British pressing of A Broken Frame. You can see the label. I would suggest getting the British pressing. It sounds a lot better than the American pressing. That's not always true. It is for this second album, in my opinion. So something major happens after Depeche Mode finish A Broken Frame. Alan Wilder joins the band. Alan Wilder is a musical genius. He's a prodigy who came into the audition, and it was obvious to everyone in the room that he was the guy. He's the musician in the band. Martin Gore is a masterful songwriter, but he turns in some of his demos, and when you hear the finished song, you're like, how did you get that from that? Alan Wilder is how you get that. He's the one who put the skin on the skeletons of these songs. His importance cannot be underestimated. It's often been said about this era of Depeche Mode. Martin writes the songs, Dave sings the songs, Alan's the musician, and Fletch. Hey, come on. Somebody's got to book the hotel. In August of '93, the band drops Construction Time Again. This is a very underrated album that I really love. Alan Wilder is a full member on this. The band are a foursome again, and it shows. It's a very strong album. It kicks off with Love in Itself, one of my favorite songs on the album. If Leave in Silence was the first great song of the Martin Gore era, Love in Itself is the first iconic song of the Martin Gore era. More Than a Party shows how much Dave's voice has grown since the first album. He's in full crooner mode here. Pipeline is a monotonous drone. Don't worry, that's what they're going for. And it really creates the mood that it's going for. Everything Counts is the real money shot on this album. Pardon my porn reference. The grabbing hands grab all they can, all for themselves, after all. It's a competitive world. Everything counts in large amounts. Have those lyrics aged like fine wine or what? How prescient is that track? Sadly, those lyrics are more accurate than ever. The beautiful melody that Martin plays on the melodica is really what makes that song so special. It's a brilliant song and features the wonderful lyrical couplet, "Providence taken in by a suntan and a grin," offered without political comment. 2-Minute Warning was written by Alan Wilder. Lyrically, it's just as dark as Martin's songwriting, but the music at times is very Kraftwerk-like. The song Shame is the hidden Gore gem on this album. It's a political song, but it houses a very sexy Dave vocal. Soap won't wash away your shame. I've never been so turned on by government apathy. The Landscape is Changing is another Alan Wilder song. Alan has momentarily taken over the George Harrison allotment of 2 songs per album, and it's a bit preachy at times regarding climate change, and it's got a very hooky chorus. The song I Told You So is an anti-violence song that's very critical of religious hypocrites. It's one of Martin's catchiest songs on the album, buried on side 2. The final track, And Then, it's another track about the state of the world and walking that tightrope between optimism and pessimism regarding its future, and it's the perfect way to end the album. By the way, after the track ends, stick with side 2 for a short little reprise of Everything Counts that you can take home with you. I know the big hits are on side 1, but you sleep on side 2 at your own peril. In July of 1984, the band released People Are People. This was a compilation release for the North American market, because when Construction Time Again failed to chart, they felt that US fans needed to get caught up on the band. It's got their latest single at the time, People Are People, assorted singles and B-sides, as well as the best song off of Broken Frame, Leave in Silence, and Get the Balance Right, which was the first track with Alan Wilder. I've always loved this downbeat little comp, and I think it's aged very well in a way that a hits-oriented comp wouldn't. This also has the 12-inch mix of Everything Counts in larger amounts, represented here. It is fun, fun, fun. It always makes me smile because of the heavy-handed production techniques employed at the time. It may be a primitive remix by today's standards, but that's why I find it so charming today. Incidentally, speaking of hits on comps, this is Catching Up with Depeche Mode. This was a North American release that was supposed to be our version of the singles comp that was released in Britain. It handles all of the singles and non-album singles from the first album right up through Some Great Reward. It's really a delightful little comp. It mixes the popular with the offbeat. It's the perfect sunny, upbeat cousin to the People Are People comp. So I highly recommend this. In September 1984, the band released Some Great Reward. This is the album that saw them finally break through in America in a big way. They went to a record signing in Los Angeles, and 200,000 people showed up. The band were as shocked as anyone at their new popularity. A word of warning for vinyl enthusiasts. There's horrible sibilance on this album. For the uninitiated, sibilance sounds almost like the album has a lisp. Anytime Dave sings anything with the letter S, or a CH together, or sometimes even a T, it's drawn out in a sort of harsh technical lisp. It's on both the UK and US originals of this album, so it's got to be baked into the recording itself, either by the way it was recorded, or when it was mastered, or when it was pressed, but it's there. I think the CD managed to tame it somewhat. If any of you have found a pressing without sibilance, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. Added to the sibilance, the record was cut hot, so it's very bright sounding. Added to that, the use of samples on this album is pretty harsh sounding, so there's very little mid-range to speak of. Now, all of that said, regardless of all its technical flaws, this is a terrific album. And when it came out, it could do no wrong with me and sounded very cutting edge. Something to Do sets a hectic pace for this album, and it lays out a cornucopia of Martin Gore imagery. Boredom, depression, leather boots, and a pretty dress. Lie to Me is Martin's idea of a love song. It's got a great Dave vocal, and the music production on the track is some of the best on the album. To me, the song's chorus sounds almost like an ancient ancestor of the later Depeche Mode hit, It's No Good. People Are People is the first Depeche Mode hit that transcended their audience with its message. David sings, "People are people, so why should it be? You and I should get along so awfully." And then that little beautiful imp, Martin Gore, sings the beautiful counter melody. "I can't understand what makes a man hate another man. Help me understand." Fuck your name, Marty. Can you hear how relevant that song still is in 2020? Maybe more than ever. Who doesn't need to hear that song right now? Help me understand. It Doesn't Matter is a moody little number that's very atmospheric and quite honestly should have ended side 1. Speaking of which, Stories of Old is one of the most curious songs in the Depeche Mode canon. It's got very odd musical cadences, and the lyrics seem very first draft. It's more B-side than side 1 ender, if you ask me. But still, that was a great first side of music. Side 2 kicks off with Somebody, which is the first single release sung by Martin Gore. Although that's misleading because it's really a double A-side. The other A-side was Blasphemous Rumors, which I'm ready to call the actual A-side. In any case, Martin sings the song with solo piano accompaniment over a bed of people talking, heart beating, train traffic, and other found sounds. It's a very unique track. Next comes Master and Servant. It's one of the most fun Depeche Mode songs to sing. I'll spare you that. It's a lot like life. I lied. The lyrics go, domination's the name of the game. In bed or in life, they're both just the same. Except in one, you're fulfilled at the end of the day. Come on, those are lyrics. You're wearing those lyrics. It's got a really fun musical hook that's not all that dissimilar from the hook used by The Cure in Let's Go to Bed. If You Want is Alan Wilder's solo joint on the album. Martin was already tightening the grip on him being the only songwriter in the band, and Alan was so busy and happily fulfilled just working on the music that Alan wrote very little after this. The lyrics are pretty pedestrian, but Alan's such a beautiful musician, there's lots for you to enjoy musically. Blasphemous Rumors is perhaps the best album ender in their entire canon. It's the song that, perhaps more than any other track on this album, sums up the mood of the album, and is almost the audio equivalent of the picture you see on the front cover. Kind of beautiful, sad goth couple getting married. From its harsh industrial opening, the song softens with Dave's vocals and takes a long dive into a pool of melancholia. And it's oddly revivifying. I'd be remiss, however, if I didn't bring up the fact that this is the track that suffers the most from the sibilance on this album. And being the last track on the album, there's inner groove distortion as well. Still, or should I say, still, the greatness of the track shines through. By the way, after the track ends, there's a little synth loop that almost sounds a little bit like a mechanical horse wheezing its way across the finish line of the album. This was a big breakthrough for the band. In March of 1986, they released Black Celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached my favorite Depeche Mode album. This album is all about mood and feel and darkness and despair and sex and pain. In other words, Depeche Mode got real. Martin wrote all the songs, a distinction he would not let go of again without a fight. It's a very unique cover. It has embossed symbols on the front. The back also has embossed ribs under each of the tracks. Ribbed for your listening pleasure, I'd imagine. The title track, Black Celebration, is the perfect kickoff to this album. It really keys you in that this is something new for the band. The songwriting has taken a giant leap. Thank you, Mr. Gore. The music has become complex without becoming convoluted. Thank you, Mr. Wilder. And there are way more emotional shades to the vocals. Thank you, Mr. Gahan. And, oh, yeah. Hi, Fletch. Fly on the Windscreen, final, is unrelentingly dark, which I love. The first words are death is everywhere. That's how you open a song. This track is representative of how this album as a whole shook off the fair weather fans who just wanted happy synth anthems and solidified their growing goth fan base who were already into bands like Susie and the Banshees and The Cure. The song A Question of Lust is sung by Martin Gore and was the second single off this album. Here he pretty much lays down the formula for his solo songs. Heartbreaking torch songs that will make the young girls scream. Sometimes a quick little acoustic piano ballad that is also sung by Martin. Then we get to Stripped. Stripped is a sexy, sexy song. Stripped is no doubt the song on this album that made a New Musical Express writer accuse them of being pussycats playing at being deviant. But in actuality, Vince Clarke was the pussycat. These boys are deviant. This is baby-making music. Sad little goth babies. But still, Here Is the House is my favorite deep cut on this album. It's darkly beautiful, with such evocative lyrics, and a great vocal performance by Dave, with excellent backing vocals from Martin. The song may not live up to it, but World Full of Nothing is a great fucking song title. It doesn't sound like anything else on the album. Dressed in Black, I think, is about a guy who is in thrall to a dominatrix. A little master and servant callback. And get used to that, because that's coming on future albums as well. That's followed by the second Dress song on this album, New Dress. And it's another hidden gem on this album. The lyrics of the verses juxtapose horrific headlines of murder, war, and earthquakes, with the chorus's innocuous headline of Princess dies wearing a new dress. Then the bridge happens. You can't change the world, but you can change the facts. And when you change the facts, you change points of view. If you change points of view, you may change a vote. And when you change a vote, you may change the world. When I first heard those lyrics, I was like, oh, Depeche Mode's so clever. That's such a funny concept. It's a funny concept because it's impossible. You can't change facts. Well, now we're living in a time of changed facts. Don't change facts. Don't change a vote. But Not Tonight is a brilliant final track. These guys are great at ending albums. But Not Tonight is perhaps my favorite song on this album. And it leaves the LP on a positive, uplifting note, which is the only way you can end an album like Black Celebration. Still my favorite album by them. In September of 1987, the band released Music for the Masses. This is one hell of an album. I consider Music for the Masses Depeche Mode's best album. Not my favorite, not their most successful, but their best collection of songs. And if you were of a certain age when it was released, you remember how impressive it was. Time diminishes certain things, like an album's impact. This album's arrival was a major event. Never Let Me Down Again, that kicks off this album. It's one of my all-time favorite Depeche Mode songs. It's the best kind of song, where the lyrics are open to interpretation, yet specific enough to convey certain images. I'm taking a ride with my best friend. I hope he never lets me down again. It can be an actual friend, the kind of friend we all love/hate. You know, that fun bad friend. The friend can be drugs. The friend can be religion. The friend can be sex. Deviant sex. Okay. And like the best of songs, it's got an awesome outro. See the stars, they're shining bright. Everything's alright tonight. You're goddamn right it is. The Things You Said is a somber track that really packs a punch thanks to the all too rare vocal interplay between Dave and Martin's voices, which blend together delightfully, and the music is just right, leaving lots of space for the lonely synth figure. Strangelove is one hell of an anthem, and perhaps the best Dave Gahan Spinning Around song. I remember seeing them on TV at like the MTV Music Awards or something in like '88. I'm watching it as a teen. It was just really exciting to see them. I'd never seen them perform before. I don't think it was live, but they were performing at least. And Dave was spinning around and wiggling his hips. I'll put the hip wiggling link below for your visual pleasure. Speaking of Dave, Sacred is one of those rare Depeche Mode tracks that's built entirely around his voice. You show me another lead singer who can sell the lines, "I'm a firm believer and a warm receiver." Back up, Morrissey. Little 15 is a delightfully demented little track that has a little Russian Cossack in it. Side 2 kicks off with Behind the Wheel. That's how you kick off a side 2. It's downbeat, but it's got that undeniable dance rhythm that really elevates the track. I Want You Now almost sounds like somebody crossbred the Wicked Witch of the West's Singing Guards with the vocal group Pentatonics. Bit of a reach. The song Nothing is the hidden gem on this album, if anything can hide on a great album like this. The lyrics are deceptively simple, but the musical and vocal execution is genius. We have Alan Wilder and David Gahan to thank for why that track is so great. One of my all-time favorites. The odd instrumental Pimph, which ends the album on a rather Orwellian note, is the song I'd imagine is coming out of the PA system on the cover and back cover of Music for the Masses. This is just a monster of an album. You wouldn't be crazy to begin listening here. If you pick up one album by them and see if you like what they do, I think this is kind of the perfect album because it will key you in to their back catalog and key you in to where they were headed. Music for the Masses is a great Start Here album, in my opinion. In March of 1989, the band released their first live album, 101, which is coinciding with the release of the documentary by the same name by D.A. Pennebaker. This is a 2-disc DVD of 101. Disc 1 is the documentary, which is a fascinating look at the band taking over the world culminating in their massive show at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Disc 2 is really what you want this for. It has 12 concert tracks, totally uninterrupted by documentary footage. It's a really great little collection that captures a moment in time beautifully, and it really lets you know quite a bit about the band. D.A. Pennebaker, who did some amazing documentaries, has said that this was his favorite film that he's done of all of his documentaries. That should speak for something. In March of 1990, the band released Violator. What an album. Dave Gahan has said that Martin Gore only writes about 3 topics: faith, love, and lust, and they all come together on Violator. 1990's Violator is in a lot of ways a different Depeche Mode. Music for the Masses came out 3 years earlier. The band had grown, both in their personal lives and as musicians, and technology had made leaps and bounds since their last album. So this is a much more sophisticated Depeche Mode than we've heard to date. World in My Eyes kicks off the album perfectly with one of those undeniably catchy Alan Wilder constructed bass lines. Sweetest Perfection is a slinky, sexy track, and Personal Jesus, represented here, was a massive hit. It was the lead single off the album, reaching number 13 on the UK charts and number 28 on the US charts. Do you want to know what other US singles were on the charts at the time? Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You by Milli Vanilli, Hangin' Tough by the New Kids on the Block, and 2 Live Crew's Me So Horny. Believe me, getting to number 28 on those charts, major achievement. Halo is another irresistible Wilder bass line, over which Dave's vocals flow effortlessly. Waiting for the Night is the quintessential Depeche Mode ballad. This record does not let up. Side 2 kicks off with Enjoy the Silence, which is one of those iconic Depeche Mode songs where you can't believe there was ever a time where that song didn't exist. It's one of the best songs of the 90s, but I don't want to belabor the point. Words are very unnecessary. They can only do harm. The song Policy of Truth sounds almost like a sort of sister song to Enjoy the Silence, using similar synth tones, but producing a much sexier, sleeker, bass-heavy track overall. Blue Dress is sung by Martin Gore, and it reminds me a lot of Question of Lust off of Black Celebration. To hear him sing the song, you would think it was about emotional domination or sexual perversity. In actuality, it's about how when his lady puts on this blue dress, it makes him happy. He's a man of simple pleasures, Martin Gore. Get you a man that's easy to please. Clean has an industrial edge to it, ending the album on a brutal yet positive note. In real life, though, I kind of wonder if Martin wrote the song so that Dave would have to sing about being clean years before he would be clean. Kind of half fuck you, half wish fulfillment. This is such a strong album, it's ridiculous. Finding good sounding copies of this album is sometimes hard. I tracked down the 2016 European Sony copy. I highly recommend it. If you're not going to get a good sounding copy, don't bother with it on vinyl. Be very careful and research if you're going to buy any copies of Violator. They're not all the same. In March of 1993, the band released Songs of Faith and Devotion. I do not have this on vinyl. No Depeche Mode album would ever be this big of an event again. What'd you say? Oh, Ultra? No, you're wrong. This is Depeche Mode's last great album. Statement, not a question. I Feel You brings you Depeche Mode at their most grittiest and grimiest and dirtiest. I love it. The raunchy sound of this album was one that was really wanted at the time by producer Flood, by Alan Wilder, and especially Dave Gahan, who had spent months living in LA and palling around with the likes of Jane's Addiction. Underneath all the grit and dirt of that track, I Feel You, is a really beautiful love song. The production on Walking in My Shoes is very sophisticated. Thank you, Mr. Wilder. The first time I heard this song, I remember thinking, this song isn't their best. It kind of reminds me of a few things I've heard in previous Depeche Mode songs. But once the chorus kicked in, You'll Stumble in My Footsteps, the hairs on the back of my neck went up. Just like when I hear the best of Depeche Mode songs. It's a great track. Condemnation is as close as Dave Gahan will ever come to being an alt-rock Otis Redding. He throws down on that fucking song, man. It's very stripped down, and Dave carries the song with one of his most gutsy performances. It's a seriously soulful track that's got a lot of gospel going on. Gahan takes us to church. Our Lady of Faith and Devotion. This may be my favorite song on the album. Don't at me. Mercy in You would just be a regular mid-tempo rocker, except it's got outstanding production, which elevates the song. Judas sees Martin Gore in full religious mode again, where he seems like he's written the song from the perspective of Jesus, who is putting all the apostles on blast, that they better walk it like they talk it if they want his, capital H, love. It's a New Testament twist on Tina Turner's You Better Be Good to Me. Would that make Judas Ike? In Your Room is kind of a Lewis Carroll Through the Looking Glass version of In My Room by Brian Wilson. Except in this version, the person you can tell your troubles to sounds an awful lot like a dominatrix. Get Right With Me is a straight-up Christian song. Martin, you're becoming a problem. This track might as well be called Repent, Sinners. We've come a long way since Blasphemous Rumors. The song Rush, the song seems a tad lazy lyrically, and things are a bit messy musically. But Dave really kicks the song over with attitude. One Caress sounds like it could have been on Black Celebration. Oh wait, it was. It was called Dressed in Black. That's unfair. World Full of Nothing? Okay, a bit. Songs of Faith and Devotion is the last album to feature Alan Wilder. Alan was with the band from 1982 through 1995. This ends the classic period of Depeche Mode. There's a documentary on the making of the band's next album, Ultra, titled Depeche Mode 95 to 98, subtitled, Oh Well, I Guess That's the End of the Band, which comes from how Martin Gore felt after the departure of Wilder. That's how important he was. I'm with Marty. They also had to take a 4-year break before their next album, Ultra. So nothing was quite the same for them. And nothing they've done after this album really speaks to me. Let me know if you think I'm sleeping on any great late-era Depeche Mode tracks. Believe me, I want to be wrong on this. Depeche Mode's recent Hall of Fame induction happily included all 5 former members, though Lockdown Protocol has robbed us all of what would have been an outstanding and fascinating on-stage performance reunion from all the members of Depeche Mode past and present. I love Depeche Mode. I hope you do too. Leave me a comment with your favorite Depeche Mode album or song. Click Show More below for lots of links to stuff. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell so that you'll be alerted when I drop new content. Find me here every single Wednesday. I'll see you next week with a lot more cool stuff.